What's up, everybody? Larian Studios really has not made a bad game when you think about it, at least in my opinion. I think that all the way back to Divine Divinity and Beyond Divinity, I've just adored their games. I think Larian Studios knows what they're doing when it comes to Divinity, Original Sin 1 and 2. These are titles that really have pushed the entire genre forward. So hearing that they were going to be handling Baldurs Gate 3 excited me, even if at the same time there was a little bit of trepidation because, hey, this is Baldur's Gate. I grew up on these. The Icewind Dales and the Baldur's Gate. Those are the games that I basically ended up cutting my teeth on. So I got a chance to check out Baldur's Gate at a preview event in San Francisco a couple months ago, and I was excited to get a chance here recently to check out 20 or so hours of content of the early access version that's going live here in a day or so. Larian Studios hasn't actually been exactly casual with their claims of what you're going to get with Baldur's Gate 3. I think a lot of us were expecting it. And the question's gonna remain, will it appease old-time fans? Will it bring in new fans? Will people who like the Divinity games move to this with ease? Luckily, this preview time is upon us, so here are my thoughts. Remember, this is an early access and basically a beta. There are some graphical issues, there's some performance issues. That was expected, as well as some missing cutscenes and placeholder assets. This is not a final in any form. If you like the video, I'd love for you to subscribe or hit the all notifications button. Let's begin. As you start out, you're able to make custom characters from one of the various different races, as well as many times the sub-races themselves. I personally wasn't really incredibly excited about what I saw when it comes to a lot of the ability to tune a character to look in a particular way. There wasn't a lot of sliders, for example, your face and things like that. I'm hoping that that actually adjusts and we get more chances, especially because you are seen in cutscenes quite a lot. A lot of times when you pick a generic looking character in this game, well, they basically can't be changed too much other than, of course, your beard, the hair color, hair design, and a couple other things. You jump in there, you decide what kind of class you want, and with those classes, you get skills and abilities, all basically the expectations that we all have. And then you begin. And I think the basic place to begin is the bad guys, and that's mind flayers. They're bastards. If having a cephalopod for a head wasn't a great sign that basically this is hazardous to your health to be around, then certainly the fact that they grab people and shove their wiggling babies into their heads at the very least should be some kind of caution light. Oh, and the tadpoles, they build a nice console for themselves inside your brain pan, and over time they end up taking you over. And that's the fiction, and that's how it starts. You're on an illithid ship, the ship ends up getting attacked and crash lands, and boom, you're on an island. This is basically where we saw a lot of the trailers end. Your ship crash lands, and you're on this beach, and as you go about collecting your thoughts and collecting information and collecting different items and collecting bad guy skins, you also happen to collect friends and maybe some foes along the way. Friends come in the form of characters who can join your party, here and there. Now, during dialogue, you can also discuss more about their lives and what makes them tick, as well as subtly affect their thoughts of you as you make decisions in the game, depending on who's in your party and what you end up doing. At any time in the game, at least as long as you're not in battle or somebody's not dead, you can also go back to your camp and identify who you want to go with you on the next day's adventures, as well as discuss more about everybody's lives. One of the cool things about the game is that the different characters act differently depending on if they're out and about adventuring or if they're back at the camp. A little bit of fiction that plays off there. Another place where the fiction pays off is the actual game and the way the tadpoles themselves are in your brain. Baby mind flayers swimming around that brain pan. Sometimes they allow for you to tap into their psionic power and make decisions, so you can see inside people's minds. The more you do this, the more you tap into that, the more you seem to grow in tune with them. And whether that's a bad or a good thing, I'll let you be the judge of, but I assume, best bet, it's probably not the greatest thing, high-fiving an illithid baby like Tom Cruise at a volleyball game. Regardless what happens, though, at some point you're going to jump into battle. Now, battle has a couple changes. The first is the change to the initiative system. As good as it is, I would say it doesn't always protect you from a bit of the clumsiness that is occurring in the action system itself. You always have the ability to move around. That's done in either feet or meters, which is sort of like a flexible, almost an elastic tape that a lot of wargamers may be accustomed to. And then at any point, you can also take your main action and smaller sub-actions depending on exactly how much energy you have left. Those sub-actions can also be lifted up or lofted up, and you get more of them by eating various things like an apple or something like that, which will give you a little bit of an extra boost and the ability to maybe pull off a little bit more during your move. Baldur's Gate has a lot of the issues that we see in any other game that handles a more flexible and almost, dare I say, infinite style of movement system that then switches over to your action buttons when you actually perform those actions. A lot of that is because the way the game is set up and the amount of movement that you can engage in can sometimes make you think, oh, I've landed at a spot where I can for sure get a shot on somebody, and you actually can't. Or there's a weirdness with how the range works. This is something that we deal with in these games, but be aware that it is noticeable when you pull something off, you land in a spot and you're like, I'm definitely going to attack this guy. And then you look and you have 36% chance to hit him. And you're like, what the hell? I'm right near him. And this is a sword. I should be able to just stab him. But it shouldn't really be identified as a negative. It's something that you'll get accustomed to quite quickly. You have that main move and then you have those secondary moves. One of them, and it's been shown many times during the demos, is pushing. And I want to talk about that in particular. Pushing enemies is very cool. This is something that you can now do. You can push them into acid and water, then freeze it, and into fire and so forth. It's always actually very fun to be able to push characters around. You have these secondary moves, and that's one of them, as well as the ability to dip weapons. But there's no real reason not to just try it. And you might find yourself just pushing someone to push them without really worrying too much if it works or not. And it becomes this weird secondary end of turn button as you continue to play the game. It's not necessarily a bad thing, and sometimes you of course won't want to push them away, especially if they have a ranged weapon where actually they're going to end up having a greater accuracy if they're farther away from you. But a lot of times you end up pushing that and it just feels a little weird. You also have the ability to do other things like helping characters stand up if they are knocked down prone. For the main moves, it's all about movement and then an action button. The original game always had little secrets when you travel to different locations. The ability to jump as a side move here for traversal in the open world when you're not in battle can actually net you some pretty cool items or pretty cool experiences as you jump around the game world. You might jump around a cliff and find a spot there, and there might be an animal friend that you can talk to. One thing to remember also is that they've been talking about how this is such a deep game, maybe even deeper than the prior ones, meaning that especially for early access, it's not about one time through it, but probably about 2 or 3. I'm not sure how that's going to play out in the main game proper and how many times people will want to experience these things, but at the very least, it makes that playthrough feel very unique, and that's because of multiple different systems that they have sort of built on one another here. And a discussion system that can lead you completely astray. One thing to remember is the game encourages choice, and its lack of safeguards can be confusing to games who are accustomed to fucking bumper RPG games like a late night bowling game where it always seems to try to right you and save you. If you leap in over your head in this game, you're probably dead. Try to pull one over on someone and they find out, you're in for a fight with the entire town. Now this can happen in discussions where a normal discussion seems like it's going well, and then boom, you are basically given the ogre's choice. Die quick or die slow. As they're talking, you can actually click on one of the other characters and become that character and prepare for the battle. Sort of like in the movies where one character sees the discussion going south and gets over to an angle to get a better shot when the action actually gets going. The game's also no pushover. It doesn't have a difficulty adjustment for the early access. It's not easy though, I have to say that, especially if you're not exactly 100% prepared. I found most combats to be pretty deadly, especially if you are not right on top of things. And remember, your characters are never going to be super powerful in this version. I think it's locked to 4th level. So you're going to run into battles where there might be 10 to 12 to 14 enemies in there all jockeying for position to see who can kill you first and turn you into a friggin' pincushion. You gotta be prepped. And that goes even for the narrative. At some point in the game, I had an argument with a squirrel about who controlled the land I was tromping around. And after I really told that squirrel who was in charge, well, I walked away like the French without the cheese and just surrendered myself. It was awesome. A squirrel ended up beating me in a discussion. When it comes to the graphics, again, this is early access, but I like the granularity of the reactions of the characters. Lip syncing may be a bit off, but the emotion shown on characters' faces, that is second to none. It's a bit insane to see the eyebrow crinkle and adjustments of a character as they turn from sort of being open and allowing for you to talk and then being against you. But when you look at the combat and the way it plays, and when you look at the narrative and the way it plays, this brings to the forefront a discussion that I think is important as we move forward, and that's Baldur's Gate, and later, of course, Icewind Dale and others have a particular feeling to them. They weren't required nor rushing the gamer to instant battle moments. You did have battle, but even in Icewind Dale, the more notoriously combat-heavy of those games, it wasn't at the pace that Baldur's Gate 3, at least here in this early access, actually exposes you to. And it can feel a little off. And it always feels a bit weird to be like, hold on, let's not yank this con-like friggin' brainworm from my head as quickly as possible so I can sit down to read the 12 annotated chronicles of Elminster's walk across Icewind Dale. What's good about this, though, as you continue to play, you do see that lore is there. It's just that the pacing feels a little bit weird to me, at least right now. Now, there were a couple times when I got into discussions and I really wanted to see what was going to happen, and the game gave up an alert and said, we haven't made the cutscene for this yet. A cutscene is forthcoming. Those cutscenes may have held a lot of that data that I really wanted. I definitely do feel that the gameplay's got some very good chops. I've always been a fan of their kind of stuff, and the interaction is next level. Being able to pick up stuff and throw it and shatter different things during combat is always very cool. That ability to see your D&D roll, as it were, and see it fail or succeed is so cool, especially when you see that you need a 12 and you're like, here we go, and you get an 11. That's D&D, right? That's what we want. This game has enough going on, and you can certainly see those interactions, that it does feel like D&D light, and it always has when it comes to the Divinity Original Sin games. And I think Baldur's Gate will have no problem later on. It's just, I want to know, will it cause that feeling, that anxiety and excitement that you get when you first heard Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 and their title screen music? And when it comes to sound, music, and voice, let's discuss it for a second. Music is a little bit threadbare. There were certainly some cutscenes as well with no music playing whatsoever, and this is something that I'm sure they're just not done with those tracks, but it does show you the importance of music when there's some poignant moment and no music plays, and you just hear a little bit of scratching as a character grabs some item from a box, and you're like, yeah, not as cool as I thought it was going to be. When it comes to the voice, these are excellent. They're emotive. Voice lip syncing, a little bit off, but the actual emotions that are delivered worked incredibly well with the facial animations that we're getting. I adored that. When it comes to sounds, overall, everything I heard sounded great. There was no actual issues there. There were some times where, especially when I was traveling around the game world, there was some drops of the 3D audio. But again, this is early access. You absolutely have to expect it, and they did everything to make sure everybody is aware day one when it came out. So when it comes down to it, what are my thoughts of this preview? I think that this is probably in the perfect company's hands, even though I've stated that I'm a little nervous about Baldur's Gate and that ability to sort of enwrap us in that fiction that the original games had. I think Larian Studios is the company to do that. I absolutely do. They did it with the original games. Divinity Original Sin is one of the most enjoyable lore-filled games ever. There's a little bit of a pacing issue here and there, but there's also missing assets everywhere when it comes to early access. What you get, though, is a game that, aside a couple issues and maybe a HUD that could be cleaned up. In fact, I would say the HUD has its own issues that I would certainly like to see sort of cleaned up. What you have is a game that shows us that the combat chops are there, and that D&D light feeling of a player interacting with a GM is there as well. There really is no better company, I think, to move Baldur's Gate forward other than the original, and those people are all spread to the wind. So for me, early access and what we're seeing right now absolutely raises my hopes of this game. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Check out all of my other videos. I would love for you to subscribe, hit the notification all button. You can check out Twitter, Facebook. If you want some cool merch, you can go to Teespring, ACG, or you can become a patron. And that link is in the description as well as on the video here. I would love for you to jump into the Patreon, join us. If not, peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.